So thank you for coming. My name is Christa. I've been working with kids for about 8 years, but working in Greece in this context for almost 4 now. I started working in the Khora Community Centre, which was based in Athens. And while I was there, I was coordinating the kids space, which then became a family space. What we did there is we had 2 rooms, one for younger kids, one for older kids, learning through play. That started off as a sort of drop-off session for adults using the building while they were accessing the other services, and then became a sort of more family space because of sort of licensing. I then took a break from Athens and worked in a nursery in Edinburgh, and then came back. And when I came back, we set up a learning through play space in one of the squats in Athens. So almost all of my experience is kind of from the ground, I guess. Learning, a lot as we went and responding to the challenges we faced, which were kind of different in each context. I think lots of people in this chat will have had experience, so it would be really nice to hear from people. What we'll cover in this workshop is thinking about how we can tailor learning through play, sort of thinking about the different contexts that we're working in and the challenges that might be presented there. At each kind of stage, it'd be really nice to hear people's experiences, opinions, and so we can kind of use this as a sort of mutual learning space, hopefully. What I will say is, and same with kind of my approach to working with kids, is, great if you want to get involved, it's super encouraged, but if you want to sit back and just listen and absorb, that's totally fine. We'll have one stage where we'll split you off into groups to have a think about something. But again, if you're not comfortable chipping in, you'd rather just listen, feel free to do so. So we've kind of introduced ourselves. I'm going to get rid of this little pop-up. And we'll go straight in. We'll say, if you've got questions about something that I haven't covered that's not exactly related, we'll have time at the end as well to go through it. Is everyone kind of clear on that, or have any questions? Great. What we can do in terms of asking questions, I guess, is you can either put it on the chat box, or turn your audio on. In the chat box is probably easier, but we'll see how it goes. So there we go, we've done that. So I mean, what is learning through play? It's fairly evident through learning through play, but I'm wondering, does anyone have any opinions about what it means more specifically, or any experience with it, or is it new? And it would be great if people just want to pop in the chat box if they've had experience in learning through play. Exactly what everyone said, and it doesn't really have one particular definition, but what Jodie said about social development, confidence building is absolutely true. I really like what you said, Kiki, about drawing it into adult learning. Thank you, Sadie. Drawing it into adult learning. I think, learning through play, people have a perception that it's for children of kindergarten age, and that's when we stop, and then that's when we start sitting in classrooms and learning by rote. But for me, learning through play and we'll come into why it's important, is particularly useful in this context. So I think everyone can kind of see the quote on the screen, but it's basically, it's a way of drawing in all of the skills that children are learning behaviorally, socially, cognitively, but incorporating that in play. And that's a kind of, I guess, a sort of super holistic way of learning, where we're not sort of sitting down and getting kids to memorize, but we're teaching a number of skills through creative play, imaginative play, etc. So there's a quote here, which I think is quite useful. So through make-believe games, children can be anyone they wish and go anywhere they want. When they engage in socio-dramatic play, they learn how to cope with feeling, how to bring the large, confusing world into small, manageable size, and how to become socially adept as they share, take turns, and cooperate with each other. When children play, they are learning new words, how to problem solve, and how to be flexible. So, I mean, for me, learning through play is, useful for children from any context, can be incredibly useful for adults as well. But I think it's good for us to think about why we can utilize it in this context. So I've written here, lack of professional training in volunteer base. So obviously we've got some teachers in this chat, we've got people with lots of different experience, and often we can be lucky that we're working with people that have come from a professional background. But what we will also have is lots of volunteers with a big willingness to help and hopefully time, who may not have had that experience. What I don't mean by this is that learning through play is a cop-out whatsoever, but it can be very difficult to sort of teach kind of higher level languages, maths, sciences without training. Learning through play, however, is about creating a safe, imaginative, creative environment where kids feel comfortable. So it can be a good way of developing on the kind of people resources we have, led by a trained, experienced coordinator, but without trying to kind of force something that isn't possible. I think, there can be a danger with promising to parents, particularly, that we can teach language to this level, we can teach maths to this level if we don't have that experience. Working across age and language. So what I've said before is that, I don't think that learning through play should be limited to the, early kindergarten years, because obviously lots of kids that we will have worked with, even though they're 9, 10, 12 years old and should technically have been in school, some of them won't have been. Some will have missed years of education. Some, will have to wait for their papers to come through, their addresses to come through, their permanent sort of settlement placement to come through. So since they might have missed out on that education, using play to build up their confidence, their familiarity with teachers, with adults, is quite a good way as a stepping stone for them to go into formal education, which all of them will do at some point. In the squat, for example, lots of kids weren't in school. Some of the time that was because their parents didn't want them to go. Some of the time it's that they couldn't. What we hope to do, alongside helping parents access formal education, was to kind of teach some of the basic principles of the skills that they would need to go into formal education. Confidence, socializing with each other, sharing, listening to teachers, engaging in a calm, confident way. Again, with language, you might have a group of children who may have no English or Greek, they may have some. You may be working with Farsi, Arabic, Pashto, any number of languages, and your volunteer or teacher base may also be coming from a wide range of language. But, it's always sort of said that play is something that kind of crosses all of those boundaries. And hopefully we can incorporate some language learning in that. But the primary function there is to help kids feel confident, not only with adults that they don't know, but with the other kids, and find ways to communicate through play. We've sort of covered the stepping stone to formal education. Something that I won't go into in any particular length because I'm not a trauma specialist and I don't want to, because it's a very fragile thing. But there is lots of research about what play can do for those who've experienced trauma. And I still want to be careful to not say that all kids you work with will be traumatized. But for those that are, play can be a really helpful tool. I don't think, unless you have the experience, our role as play facilitators should be to give therapy in this way, but it's a good thing to bear in mind. And there's a kind of quote here you can see on the page for that. I wonder as well if people think about the areas that they're working in, if they can have a think about why play might be useful for your context as you've experienced it. And we'll take a little minute there for people to just type their answers in. Yeah, great. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, great. I think, no, there's definitely something in that.
I'm not really sure I capitalise socially, but
it's also true that in some cases, children who have experienced, hi Khora, children who have experienced trauma quite often stop being able to play. The exact reasons for that, you'd have to ask a sort of specialist, but giving them that space where they can feel comfortable and safe and to explore is really useful. And, versus a situation where you're kind of sitting them down and telling them to do a specific activity, if you can allow them to explore in their own time, then hopefully they can kind of start moving into a place where they're confident to play and then use that as a building block. Yeah, and thank you, Franz, that's great as well. Kids, can play with each other really, really naturally. But as many of you have probably seen, in intense situations, particularly in camps, there can be arguments, there can be fighting, but hopefully by making connections through play, they can, start to get over some of these tensions. And I can find that often that feeds into the parents as well. When parents see their children playing together, it can create really strong social community bonds, which is great. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Roisin. And yeah, Karen as well, I think having that safe space, and we'll come on how we can kind of make it their space, is great for kids to be able to kind of come away from an environment that might be quite difficult. Okay, so we'll have a little look now about how we can think about, oh great, sorry, I've missed these. Hi, City, thanks. Trained play worker, which is amazing. Perfect, yeah, thank you. Everyone can see these, can't they? So I think it's really useful to have a little look at what everyone has been saying, and it's nice to see everyone's coming in with different experiences. Okay, great. So I'm going to apologize for my PowerPoint skills. I think it's been at least 15 years since I've had to make a PowerPoint. So I've looked at kind of 3 different areas that we might think about before creating a program of play. So the first one there is space. When I talk about space, I mean obviously physically, are we looking at, do we have a room? Do we have an outside space? But also thinking about how we can create a sort of, less literally, a space that children can enter. And when they enter, they feel safe and comfortable and that it's theirs. This is actually from Montessori, who I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. But she basically came up with the idea that previously classrooms would have, adult-sized chairs, adult-sized tables. The idea that a classroom should be kind of child-sized, making sure that it was accessible, the kids felt that it was theirs, and that they were part of creating that space. What we did in the squat, for example, is removed kind of all of the furniture that was too big, was broken, that had been left over from when it was a school, and tried to put in things that were child-sized. In that instance, we had absolutely zero budget, and we really had to improvise. I think we turned over a bookcase and put on a cloth and made that into a small table and covered crates with bits of material, kind of doing everything we could just to make that environment feel more child-friendly. We also, there was about 40 kids living there, got some of the older kids involved in choosing the colour, putting up decorations, deciding how we would use the space, cleaning it before we used it, so that really felt that it was theirs. We were quite lucky in this instance that we were able to get a space in the squat that was just for the kids. And I know that that won't always be the case. So I think it would be good for us to think together, how can you make a space yours, even if you can't kind of keep it as a permanent one. Sorry, has everyone finished with that slide? I can also send this if people want to look over it. So I guess the two main things to think about is whether we've got an indoor space or an outdoor space. In a perfect world, we'd have a little bit of both. It's really nice to work inside. It gives us much more control over the environment. But it's also great to have the freedom of outdoors to play bigger group games. So one of the considerations with indoor space is that it's shared. So do you have that as a space you can use exclusively for kids' activities? Or is it a kind of situation where you've got kids' activities in the morning and then adults in the evening? So we'll come a little bit more into that later. I just want for you guys to start thinking a little bit about that, and what issues might arise. If it's an indoor space, again, we want to think about how we can resource it. Sometimes you have a budget and sometimes you don't. It's really wonderful, as I said, to be able to get child-sized chairs, child-sized tables. but that won't always be possible, and we will often have to work with what we can. So in terms of making, say you have a shared space that's adults at one point and kids in another, can we move the adult size tables to the side? And maybe we don't have child size chairs and tables, but we can bring in nice rugs, pillows, can use a kind of plasticky tablecloth to kind of create a messy area in one corner, those kinds of things. If it's an outdoor space and if it's shared, again, we'll come into this a bit more detail later, is there a way that we can cordon it off so that kids feel like they're entering something that's theirs, they feel safe, to manage the area, and also for volunteers or teachers to be able to keep an eye of who's coming and who's going, largely for safety, but also so that children feel that it's theirs. And we'll have a little think about that later. So it would be really great if people want to maybe message in the group, say what kind of spaces are available to them and what challenges have come up. Or if you've got a really good space, what's worked, and we can use that to sort of think about that as a group. I'll leave about 2 minutes for that. Okay, thank you, Carmen. Okay, great. Okay, so it seems like size is an issue. Okay. Really nice for Kiki having 3 rooms is amazing, but yeah, obviously that presents its own challenges. Okay, great. So I also see that lots of people have shared spaces. I think having a shared space is a really big challenge, and we've definitely had the issue before of when we've shared it with adults of it not really being respected. I think, Jodie, if it's all right, we can maybe come back to the kind of COVID related stuff as a group towards the end and have a little think about ways around that. But obviously that's...
Yeah, I just wanted to type it before I forgot.
Yeah, great. But it's definitely going to be an issue. Yeah, perfect. I mean, obviously, just read everyone's responses. Okay, great. So the issue of shared space seems to have come up quite a few times. And that can be really, really challenging. I think the and I'm sure this is something that people have done, but having really good storage is really important for being able to kind of get things out that can really quickly transform the space into something that feels child friendly. But that can definitely be a challenge. And obviously the absolute best thing, which I've seen some people have, is to have a child designated space, even if it's small. For those that have both, and actually I don't know if this helps, because obviously it will be volunteer dependent, but kind of rotating groups between outside and inside. So if you've kind of got regulations at the moment in terms of numbers and space, is kind of splitting the groups at the beginning of a session and then rotating them around, which is sort of what you would do at a nursery school as well. There might be some kind of issues about people wanting to be inside or outside more, but hopefully that's one sort of solution. In terms of outdoor space, I know from having done things with the Echo Library, what is really nice is getting out rugs in the outdoor space and kind of having that as a sort of visual cue for, now we take our shoes off, we sit down, this is where we're playing, we leave the rugs, we put our shoes back on. That might not apply to everyone's context, but kind of visual cues for kids entering into a space can be really, really helpful. You could also try and do it with some low ribbon, just to kind of create a little perimeter, not like not a fence, but something visual and pretty that can feel like, okay, now I'm coming into my space. As I said, we'll come into that more. Thanks everyone for sending those in. If by the end of this workshop you've got any specific questions about how you could make that space work, then we can have a chat about that at the end. So I've given a little image of, I just found this online. I don't have a picture of where places I've worked before, but when you have a kind of indoor space and learning through play, what people will sort of tend to do is have kind of different areas that children can kind of flow around. And the challenges of doing this are, of course, if the space is shared, if the space is small, or if you've got a high number of kids. And obviously you want a quite comfortable free flow, but that kind of gives an idea, is that you would have kind of different sections. But we'll come on to that a little bit more as well. So number of kids as a sort of second consideration. So all of these factors are going to play into each other quite a lot. So, and I think, COVID-19 is going to affect things as well in terms of the number of volunteers. But you have recommendations about age and number of adults. I just took this from NSPCC learning recommendations, and different countries will have different suggestions. That kind of gives an idea. People resources can be as limited as financial, and we can't always work with as many people as we need for the number of children. Having less volunteers in an indoor space can have its sort of pros and cons. Pros is that you can kind of manage the space, you can manage access and exit from the room. But when you've got lots of resources around, it can quite quickly get out of hand, as I'm sure most of you know. So If you've then got an outdoor space, less volunteers means that you can spread out and play a game where the kids can all be involved at the same time. But of course, it's quite hard to manage the flow in and out. So that's something to kind of consider. And that might change for some people on any given day. But being able to sort of be flexible between indoor and outdoor can be quite good. Again, physical layout of space and the number of children. We'll come onto this a little bit more specifically, but thinking about the number of activities and the number of kids. So for lots of smaller activities, you might not want more than 3 or 5 kids playing at one time. So then you need to think about, okay, are there enough activities in a space or a room for all of the children to be able to get involved at the same time? Again, ages. Whenever we're working in the squat or at Khora Community Centre, we tried to split the ages between kind of early years and older years. We found a couple of things. One is that if we were low on volunteers or physical space, we didn't always have the option of splitting the ages, because it is ideal. Also, kids, if they haven't got that much else going on, if they're not in school, older kids would want to be in the younger kids session and vice versa. And we would end up being doormen just trying to manage that. So, if you've got a bigger space, is there one area of the room that can be a bit more tailored to older kids is useful? Can you kind of rotate between outdoor and indoor? Older kids go out and play some sport while the younger kids do an activity, and then you change over. I think learning through play is a really good opportunity to get ages to play with each other, and giving the older kids some more responsibilities. And rather than sort of saying, do you want to play, which lots of old kids will say no, asking if they want to help with the younger kids can sometimes get some of them involved. Does anyone have any kind of questions before we move on? Let me know also if I'm going too fast. Yeah, Sadie, that would be really good to know as well. What I would say is what we had in the squat, we try to always have at least 3 or 4 volunteers, and the number of kids, because they kind of came as they wanted to, wasn't mandatory, could be between 10 and 25 for 4 volunteers. Similarly, in the Khora kids space, we try and have 4 or 5. That could be up to 30 kids. Neither of those situations were ideal at all. Obviously, if we were too low, we wouldn't run the session, because if you're not enough, then it can be really dangerous. But we are, obviously we are all probably working with what we've got, unfortunately. Wow. Well done, Sadie. That sounds exhausting. Does anyone else? I'll give it a minute. Oh, great. Mm. Yeah, so I think it's really good that we're having this chat. So if that's okay with everyone, I'll give it 2 or 3 more minutes for people to kind of answer each other's questions.
Maybe if people want to, they could switch on their microphone. It maybe feels a bit more human to talk.
Mm.
If Sadie wanted to explain her situation.
We can also kind of come back to the end and maybe use that as a sharing session between all of us in terms of how we might manage activities with such a large number of children and volunteers. And if maybe we can kind of swap some activities that have helped, etc. Mm. All quite scary, but that is the situation, I think. Okay. All right, great. Thank you. So we can come back to this at the end because I think this is a really helpful discussion. And then if people have other things they need to go to, those that want to stay and chat, I'm really happy to continue. I want to talk a little bit about educators. And when I say educators, I also mean including those volunteers that may be coming with no experience. I think, everyone has different policies within their organizations on length of time that people are coming, the experience they need to have, etc. I would imagine for those working with a really high volume of kids in one space, having people power can be really, really useful in terms of managing that. Obviously, whilst we want to make sure that the kids are safe and they're, that everyone's kind of involved in doing things, one of the things I think with learning through play and kind of creating that safe space, whether that's literally or otherwise, is that kids can kind of come in, feel confident to play, and that they feel safe in there. Lots of kids in camps will be really used to the high turnover of volunteers. But in lots of my conversations with psychologists and psychiatrists, that can be really challenging for kids, and it's a really difficult balance that I think lots of us have had to walk across in terms of do we have enough people to run sessions, but how do we make sure that is not in itself disruptive. Looking at everyone's experience here, I think a lot of this will be obvious, but I think some of the things that are really important is having at least one consistent person working with the kids, or, two, as many as we can get, and having those as the kind of primary play facilitators. And then if we've got volunteers who are coming for a short length of time, I find really useful things to do is for the primary kind of play facilitator to introduce the sort of shorter term volunteers as they're coming in. This is my friend. They're coming to play with us for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. We're really excited to have them here. And then they're going to go. So kids know that, these are the people that I'm going to count on, relate with. And it's really fun to have these new friends that are coming to play with me, but that's for a short amount of time. I think we've kind of covered adults, number of kids, and obviously, as I've said, we won't always have the freedom of choice, but making sure that those volunteers who are maybe short term have a really good understanding of what it is you're trying to do, how to kind of relate to kids in a kind of appropriate manner. I'm not going to go into that more specifically, but it's something that we'll probably go over in another workshop, because it is obviously completely important in terms of creating a space that children feel like they want to play in. So I think that's kind of covered that. How does it work, Colette? Do you normally do a break halfway through so people can go to the toilet, or power through?
We don't normally, because if it's an hour and a half, then
it's fine. All right. How are we doing for time? All right, we're okay. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about kind of volunteers and how that works in a learning through play space? It's something I didn't want to go into too much detail with. I just wanted to kind of put in as a consideration for when we're looking at a program. Yeah, great. Thanks, Franz. So getting parents involved and is actually a really nice way to help support the programs that you're running, and also as a way for parents to get involved in their, sorry, I'm going to close this, parents to get involved in their kids' education. Often we've struggled with that in the past, particularly because parents are, full-time caregivers for their kids if they're in the camps, and the sort of time when their kids are off playing, doing an activity, is a good moment for them to have a break and have a rest. What we obviously what's nice to encourage is parents to be involved, but if that is their opportunity to take their time, I think that's a really valuable thing as well. And then hopefully the kids can go back at the end of the day and say, look what I did, look what I made. One way of getting parents involved is to try and sort of set up one afternoon a week, one afternoon every 2 weeks, to take the time to actually invite the parents, to get them involved into group play or to show them what their children have been doing. And hopefully if they're excited by that, then they'll start to join sessions. It could be that if you have kind of set times where you're doing this, asking parents to stay for the first 5 minutes and join in a song or a bit of sharing time could be a really nice way. Yeah, like you said, Martina. And I think that's great. Carmen, adults age of kids. that is, I think, a typo, and I can't remember what that means anymore. Does anyone have any ideas or ways that they've gotten parents involved alongside what Martina has said?
We had a good event. It was like a big carnival that we had that was kind of ended up getting like the whole camp involved basically. But maybe if you organize kind of one big event which is framed around kids to show off what kids have been doing and the kind of community that you've built, it might be an idea.
Yeah, great. Martina, remind me, are you working in a camp or are you working in the city?
Hi, no, I'm not working in a camp. There are 5 buildings, I believe, next to our community center that families, refugee families stay in there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So it will be different situations for whether you're based in a city, a town, if you're in a camp. Which one's been? Yeah, great. I think there's a lot to be said for resident volunteers, particularly supporting language and also for that consistency. I think it's really important. And I think that's a really good way of kind of like having the kind of child support as a, you know, fit more into the kind of wider community. Yeah, great, perfect. Okay, so in terms of thinking about what being an educator in a learning through play context means, you know, for people that are familiar with it, you'll know that our job, but, you know, as part of learning through play and encouraging children to build their confidence, it's not, you know, really our role to tell them to sit down and paint a picture. It's our role to encourage them to explore, but very much in their own time. You know, this isn't a kind of rote learning kind of environment, and having them explore at their own pace is what's really important. And what we can do as play facilitators is create environments that make them feel confident, that spark their creativity without pressuring them into engaging at any level. Oh, sorry. What we might you know, notice is some kids are taking much longer to get involved, aren't interested, and it's not to say that we won't encourage them, and we can do that in many different ways, but it's not for us to push them into activities. So, you know, drawing from our various experiences and looking at very specific context, we can kind of try and understand, okay, what's age culturally appropriate. And that will probably be very different depending on if you're in a camp, where you're in a camp, where the kids are coming from in terms of what education they've accessed. I think we really can't make assumptions about kids because we won't know what experiences they will have been through. We won't always know what education they've had access to. So just because a sort of child is 10 years old does not necessarily mean that they will be engaging at a level that you might assume sort of 10 years old kids from, you know, wherever is home to you is at. So we kind of need to kind of break down some of our assumptions about levels that kids should be at. And, you know, I think kids, if you kind of make a space that is open and inspiring, kids will try and access at their level anyway. If they're not yet comfortable working with, letters or numbers, oh, thanks, Carmen. Then letting them access it at their own level is, I think, really good. If a 12-year-old kid wants to play with Play-Doh for 2 hours, then I think that should be possible. Is there any questions on that? Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Fabiola. So, building on a theme. I don't know how many of you will have done this. And the reason why I've chosen to kind of do this in this session is hopefully it can kind of give us a basis and an example of how we might create a program, but also because I found it quite useful in terms of keeping things new, both for the kids and the people creating the program. And I think it can help in the volunteers or facilitators' creativity as well. It's quite easy to kind of get stuck and think, what do I do next? Recycle the same things, but giving yourself a focus can be quite good, particularly if you're coming with not quite so much experience. And I think it can also be really helpful for kids to get really into something, excited about it, get to feel comfortable in that theme. The length that you do this can really, really depend. I mean, it will depend on if you're seeing these kids every day, if it's twice a week, thinking a little bit about that and what works for you. In this instance, I'm, as a sort of random example, doing a C theme. We did do it before in the squat, and it was really popular, and it was quite easy to find ways of incorporating lots of different skills within it. I'm going to talk a little bit about setting up the space. The reason why I also find working from a theme quite useful is, particularly if we're working with a shared space, there's ways that we can kind of make that room or outdoor area really, really immersive, that will hopefully overcome some of the issues of it not feeling kind of kid-friendly, etc. So I've just got some ideas here. All of these obviously will require some effort and time in terms of setup. But the aim here is that children kind of come in, they're already thinking about what that theme is. Hopefully it's kind of the spark that leads on to other things. And hopefully it's something that you can do cheaply and quickly. I mean, it might be as simple as getting lots of nice blue material and draping it from the ceiling. Hopefully that doesn't interact with, or interrupt the adult space if it's a shared space. And hopefully it's something that, if it does, can be quite easily kind of put it to one side, and should take, maybe 5 minutes just to kind of hang around the room. Does that sort of make sense to people in terms of why we might do a theme? Does anyone have any ideas about how they could, quickly set up a room or a space that they're using this theme? Yeah, great. Yeah, definitely. I don't know if anyone else has found this, but water play is one of my absolute favorite things. but I've often found that parents aren't that keen. I don't know if anyone else has found that. Okay. Yeah, I like that as well, Roisin. I know what you mean. Keelan, and am I saying that right? Outdoors, I think rugs or bits of material can be really nice, even if it's just kind of blue, etc. Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Karen, for saying that. It's obviously something I thought about before suggesting it. It's going to depend on, the group of kids that you're working with. When we did the sea theme, what we focused on was less about kind of journeys and boats and ships and that kind of thing, but more on the kind of magical world of sea creatures and fish, etc. It really depends on your experience and your comfort level, but it would be, it's great if we can kind of introduce something like the sea in a different context, and it might allow some children to work through some of their experiences with that. In the instance where we did it, that actually didn't come up from the kids, for example. We did lots of sort of making dioramas of, fish, and we had a song, a slippery fish song that the kids really loved. But it's definitely something that you might consider not doing if you're not comfortable. The themes are endless, and you could really have a lot of fun with it, and it doesn't have to be this in particular, of course. This is just an example. So thank you for what hopefully I've covered what everyone has said. Okay. So I hope I haven't tailored this too much for indoor spaces. And I think we can try and workshop as a group how we might overcome it if you don't have an indoor space. What you'll often do in learning through play is have different areas where the kids can kind of rotate between. So these are examples, and obviously there's more. And what I haven't included on this slide is a sort of soft, relaxy book area. But one is construction. The other is, dress up, imaginative play, but that could also be small world, anything kind of creative and immersive. Messy play, that can cover painting, Play-Doh, moon sand, whatever that might be. And then the fourth is kind of literacy and numeracy, but you can also include in that any kind of game. This might be more focused at slightly older years, but what I'm going to ask you to do now, and shortly Colette will put you into groups, is I'll give each group a specific area of play, and we'll ask you to come up with one activity inspired by the theme. Someone put a question forward about how can we make things environmentally friendly and low cost. So maybe that's something we can think about as a group, about how we might resource that activity so it's environmentally friendly and low cost. It would be great also if you could think about what skills children may learn from this activity and what benefits they might draw from it, and then choose one person from the group to feedback.
So we talked about like making your own dress up. So if you're low on resources, making masks is always a good one. It's pretty low you don't need that much. And then I think someone else mentioned role play. You can kind of it helps also kids to visualize like the word with an image. So if one person is an octopus, another person is a shark, then you'll remember that your friend was a shark and it looked like that, and it had the fins and etc. Or an octopus has 8 legs. And then kids also get something to take home afterwards. So it's not just like you have a dressing up box sometimes, which people have, but then you can't then it's like, no, you have to leave it in the box or in the classroom or in the space at the end of the day. And it's nice that kids get to continue their play. And
yeah, great, amazing, thank you. So here are just some ideas that we did before. One is Play-Doh. I'm sure lots of you made it, but it's super easy and super cheap to make, and especially for little kids, anything kind of textural can be endless hours of fun, and incorporating that shells or stones to kind of make prints. Something that we would do for lots of different topics for the slightly older children would be to have them make their own memory games, which is where you have 2 sets of the same thing, turn them over, and then you take it in turns to try and find a pair. So kids that are starting to write or can copy out letters can either colour in or draw 2 fish and 2 crabs, and then you can laminate those, and then they can continue to play with them. And you can do that with any topic, and kids find that fun, that they've kind of made that game and can continue. We'll come into kind of keyword language sharing time in the next bit. Something that we did as a group, which was fun, was we kind of took, you could do it with a whale, or, well, a whale's maybe too big, a big sea creature like a shark or a octopus, and kind of get out a tape measure and have the kids look at how big that is in real life, and then have each kid take it in turns on a big piece of paper to count how many of their footsteps fit inside that animal, and they can all write their names with the amount of footsteps, and then all come in for a kind of messy play to paint that and then hang that up. Sea creature freeze, similarly, I guess a bit like musical bumps, musical statues. So with visual cues at the beginning, getting kids to know the names of the different sea creatures. It doesn't have to be in English, it could be in Greek or Bulgarian, whatever language you're teaching or working with. And then having the kids run around and the teacher shouts octopus or shark, and maybe you can, as a group, have come up with different motions for what those are. Again, that game can be applied to lots of different topics, and that's quite nice if kids recognize the games, but then you can adapt them for a new subject so they feel comfortable playing, kind of learning more information. We had a song that was super, super popular called Slippery Fish, which I thought if I felt brave I might do, but I won't, but you can YouTube it. But the kids really loved that, and that was a really nice thing to do as a group. So thank you everyone for feeding that in, and hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how you can do things quite cheaply, and hopefully some of those can be applied to lots of different themes or areas, or however it is you're going to do that. I thought I would talk a little bit, sorry, I'm really not that used to using PowerPoint, so I'm going to go back to the slide. So, I mean, hopefully this gives you a kind of idea. Everyone's going to run their sessions, as I said, differently, depending on the kind of number of factors we talked about. But I want to talk about a little bit how you could run a session. And then we can have a kind of chat about how that may or may not work for the context that you're working in. So what I think is really important, and it kind of plays into this idea of space and children feeling that the space is theirs in some way or another, is kind of having a beginning point of your day, whenever that session may start. Getting all the kids together at the beginning. This is also quite useful, I think, if you're working with lots of shorter term volunteers, is to use audio cues that the children will recognize, even if the people doing it are different. So pre-corona times, what we would do is sing a song like, everybody holding hands, holding hands, holding hands, everybody holding hands, make a circle. In this context, you could do everybody waving hands, whatever you like. Doesn't have to be that one, but maybe deciding as a group a song that's easy and quick to learn for new volunteers, that the kids will recognize, okay, this is the beginning of our session. We're now all coming into a circle. Someone sent a message about how we will need to adapt in camps after the sort of sessions start up again. This might be a really nice time for kids coming in. Maybe everyone gets a bit of alcohol gel when they're in the circle. You can do everybody washing hands, washing hands, washing hands, building that into the session every day. So that's kind of present. All their hands are clean. How it will work technically, I mean, I don't know. Kids are not natural social distancers, but having it in their mind that we are keeping safe and keeping clean should hopefully be also reassuring for the parents that you are thinking about that practice, and the kids are seeing you washing your hands as well. If you can work in a way that you do have a selection of activities, take for example the ones we just laid out, and this I know is obviously specific to indoor spaces. Signposting to the kids the different activities. As I said before, if you've got 20 kids, then having 4 activities is really good, as well as maybe I just kind of chill out. I don't want to really be involved. I want to sit and just draw or read books or be quiet is quite good. You can use visual cues for kids in terms of how many kids can do one activity. So for example, if it's a messy area, maybe you have 4 aprons, and that means that you can do that activity. Or if there's a table where you're doing literacy and numeracy, if there's kind of 4 chairs, that's how many there are. And making it clear that there'll be a rotation. If you can't do it now, you can do it later. So, and hopefully that means that kids know that they will get an opportunity to do each task. If you're outside, then you could, lay out different rugs. One where you've got your kind of construction area, one where you've maybe got some books, another one where you've got some paints out. And if you can, having a volunteer in each area to support the kids as they're getting involved. In a perfect world, having kind of an extra person to support any kids who don't seem like they're interested, aren't having a nice time. I hope this isn't all too ideal world in terms of adult-kid ratios. And again, at the end, we can talk about how we might overcome some of those things. On good days, I think you can have quite a natural flow around the room. A kid will be engaged, then they'll move on. I think, as someone who works with kids, you have to do a lot of room reading. So if all of the kids seem like they're super duper engaged, then I think it's quite nice to be flexible and allow them to continue and explore at their own pace. But I think most people also be familiar with that, it's starting to get a bit weird, and then trying to recognizing that before it becomes chaotic and then bringing it back into a group. It's really great, you know, for kids to feel invested in that space and the space that is created by group play. What we would use in the nursery I worked at was a song that would kind of signal, now it's time to tidy up and come back together. You know, having like a little portable speaker can be quite good. Kids recognizing that, or you can choose a song that you might pick as a group of volunteers. And then, you know, coming back. It's quite nice to, you know, have moments where you kind of sit together, and some of the things that we would do would be like little stretching games, and you could, you know, you could tailor that to the theme. So if you're doing, you know, sea creatures, it could be, let's do the octopus, let's do the octopus, let's do the fish, let's do the fish. Getting kind of little repetitive things that you can do with a group is really nice. Something that we'd also do is a kind of language sharing between the kids, which is really nice, I think, because, you know, there can be tensions between kids from different language backgrounds, but having kids share their word for octopus or their word for shark can be a really nice way of engaging in each other's languages, you know, finding similarities, finding differences. So sitting as a group and saying, you know, with a picture, for example, this is a shark. How do you say shark in Farsi? How do you say shark in Arabic? And then getting them all to say it in each other's languages. At the squat, we would always do snack, which was lovely and a really like nice moment of calm most of the time. That won't always be possible, but it does give quite a nice little break and something for kids to look forward to, you know, having an orange each, sitting together. It might also be another good opportunity to get kids to wash their hands again as a group with a song. I mean, it's obviously, again, depending on how you might work your sessions, but this would also be a good time for a swap over. So say you're doing one group inside, one group outdoors, having them swap, or changing over the room if you want to change from sort of smaller activities to a group activity, or communicating that kids can then do a different activity. But it is quite good to break it up. You know, learning through play should be quite free, but I think having a small amount of structure can be really helpful, and is more about facilitating play rather than dictating. So then you kind of have your second half of the session, whatever that may be. And then again, I think it's really good if, you know, if the kids are still there and they haven't run off or gone off to do something else, is then coming back and closing a session. Again, this kind of gives them that sense of coming into the session and then leaving the session. So even if you haven't got that really secure physical space, it's like something starts and then something ends. It gives a chance to say goodbye. Again, to tidy up, clean the space so that they are kind of actively engaging in it and making it theirs. You know, we'll have a little song at the end, another little kind of stretch together. And then if you have the opportunity for, you know, kids to show what they've made as a group, tell them if you can what's happening the next day, etc. So that's, you know, how we would basically kind of do a session. There were good days where it really worked. There were bad days where it really didn't. You know, it's obviously not going to be straightforward. And I hope that kind of gives an idea of how it might work. And, you know, I think it takes a lot of thinking about how it works for you in your situation. so that's kind of that really, kind of come to the end, and we have run over. I hope that some of that was useful, and I hope that it wasn't preaching to the choir. But hopefully, it's been really nice for me to see other people's experience and kind of share and build on that. I'm really happy to chat through now, like anything based on what I've talked about, or hear your suggestions, or if people want to just feed in with each other. We could maybe do that with microphones. We could say for maybe 10 minutes just to have a chat or questions, if that works for people.
One thing that might be an idea is, as we've gone over today, it might be nice to do a follow-up group where we have the theme of kind of learning through play, and everybody can come and just talk and share best practices, rather than it being a webinar, but more of like a follow-up and sharing meetup. We have them for the more like the education side, like the language learning for adult learners. It'd be really nice to have that community with the CFS groups as well.
Yeah, I think I would find that really useful, and I think it would be great to just share ideas of what's worked, activities that have been useful, and kind of like, it's nice. I think it's nice to bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah.
I'm also I'll put my email in the chat box, and if people do have questions or things they want to chat to, then I am way too available because of Corona at the moment. And it'd be really nice to hear from people. So I'll just do that now.
It might also be an idea for us all to talk about how we're going to change learning through play, or even just educational activities with kids once stuff starts opening up with Corona, because so much of what kids do and so much of what we try and foster in classrooms or in camp spaces is like sharing, or even the holding hands song, or splashing water on each other. It's like so much of that is not going to be possible to do, or not encouraged, or it might be interesting to talk about how it's going to impact people's activities, especially when we're lower on volunteers again.
And I think this is so unprecedented. It will probably be quite a big learning experience for everyone. So being able to kind of share that would be really useful. Does anyone have any like quick questions that they want answered?
In which case, maybe from a follow-up of this webinar, with the recording, I will perhaps suggest when we could do more of a meetup. So it's not a webinar, it's just a space to share best practices based around COVID-19 and how activities would be adapted. Would that be, can I get some like jazz hands if that's something that people would be interested in? Yeah, I'm seeing some jazz hands. Sorry?
I was just saying I don't have my video on, but I was jazz handing.
Great. Is a weekend good or is an evening good? What's better for people?
Evening for me, I think.
Okay. What does everybody else say?
Yeah, evening for me too.
Okay.
Yeah, evening is better for me as well.
Okay, great. So maybe an evening sometime next week, so we can have a follow-up session about COVID and share it more as a best practices meetup session.
Yeah, great for me.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, I'll just set a date and hopefully you can come. maybe Christa and I can think of a date that works well for people.
Great.
Thank you so much, Christa, for hosting this today.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and your input.
Yeah, thank you. And the next one will take place on, what date did we set?
The Wednesday or the Thursday after next.
Yeah, so the 10th of June on a Wednesday, same time. And can you remind us of the theme, Christa, for the next one?
So what we kind of said is we would have a little look at kind of working with kids across different languages and like different approaches in terms of like behavior and keeping the calm.
If possible.
Mm.
Exactly. Okay, great. Also, I've put the feedback form in the chat, so I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to give some feedback. It helps us to improve our webinars in the future, and we really welcome any of your ideas for future webinars that you might have. Christa, do you have anything else to add before we say goodbye?
No, I think that's that, and thank you. And then I put my email there, so obviously get in touch.